وصحبه ومن والاه. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, my embraced family. Welcome back to our weekly Wednesday discussion. We are covering the autobiography of Malcolm X. So today we're going to be going over, I believe, chapter 6. If I just remember, I remember the name of the chapter. Just want to make sure I have the number right. But chapter 6 of the autobiography, which is titled Detroit Red, and titled after the name that Malcolm received during his time at Harlem, as Detroit Red was how he was called by his peers and his friends and colleagues over there. So, inshallah, we're just going to go ahead and jump right into the discussion. As per usual, I'm only going to take around maybe 15 minutes or so to give a brief summary of the chapter, highlight some main points, and from there we will use the rest of the time for a live discussion, inshallah ta'ala. So jumping right into it, this chapter essentially covers Malcolm's time in Harlem, and really kind of covers also his first steps into a life of crime, if you will, what kind of led him into living a life of crime, or of selling drugs on the street, so to speak. And this chapter really has a lot of really important reflections that Malcolm gives to the reader for us to really just kind of think of and reflect upon ourselves. So the chapter starts with kind of where the last chapter left off. Malcolm is now working at Small's Paradise Bar, and he just kind of is describing to the reader his experience while working there and all the colorful characters that he got acquainted with while he was working at this place. And he kind of talks about all these different types of individuals that he was meeting and really developing relationships with. He spoke about, for example, Cadillac Drake, as he calls the unlikely pimp, who was shaped in a way that made him look like a Cadillac, so to speak, and how he would utilize some of the more unattractive prostitutes to really get a lot of his work done. He spoke about Sammy the Pimp, which became actually one of Malcolm's closest friends in Harlem, and he discusses how his relationship with him kind of came about. He speaks about Fewer Clothes, another individual who was a burglar who would jump from rooftop to rooftop, as Malcolm described it, and was able to do it so discreetly that he was able to easily get into some of these suburban homes, some of these other homes, in order to steal what he wanted to steal. And he speaks about all these different types of individuals and groups who are part of the ghetto, or like the darker world of Harlem. And what I really kind of wanted to focus on is a comment that Malcolm shares regarding these individuals. He kind of describes each of these individuals as having very special types of talents, right? And I just kind of want to quickly read one of the comments that Malcolm said when he was talking about these individuals. He said that many times since I have thought about it and what it really meant. In one sense, we were huddled in there, bonded together in seeking security and warmth and comfort from each other, and we didn't know it. All of us who might have probed space or cured cancer or built industries were instead Black victims of the white man's American social system. So a very powerful statement here. Kind of, Malcolm is essentially illustrating to us, the readers, that these individuals that he described are not good people. We kind of spoke about that duality back in last chapter, about how these individuals definitely were not good people and did a lot of immoral things, but they did have a certain code of ethics that they subscribed to and that they abided by. And that these individuals were, in Malcolm's eyes, they were very talented individuals and very intelligent individuals, but really he's kind of describing them as somewhat victims of a system that they have no control over. That for them, he kind of describes as this life that they're living was their means of survival. It was less of how he kind of describes it. It was less of a conscious choice and more of a means for them to survive in the conditions and in the ghettos that they were, as Malcom puts it, forced into, just due to how the system is set up, to where those who are, those who, for the most part, those who are Black are kind of have a very clear line to where they can go. They can only go so far in society. And when I was reading this part of the chapter, it kind of made me reflect about our discussions when we spoke about the new Jim Crow. For those of you who were able to join us for that discussion, if you haven't, you can watch our discussions on the new Jim Crow on either our Facebook and in our Facebook channels, inshallah ta'ala. But it really just made me kind of reflect about what we read about the new Jim Crow. And that author was also discussing how many of these individuals who are selling drugs or pimping or doing these types of, illegal, immoral acts, it's not that they're blameless, but more of these are individuals who are kind of forced into that situation, and that the system is set up in a way to where not only are they forced upon that situation, they're guaranteed to be punished to the highest degree to where they're going to be forever in that situation where they're forced to do jobs like these. And so kind of reading this part where Malcom kind of describes how they were kind of like a community that was huddled together to protect each other from the circumstances they were forced upon, just kind of made me think about those previous discussions that we were having. But inshallah, just to continue. So after this, Malcom also starts to describe how he eventually started kind of just really describing for us some of the experiences that he had, and a lot of kind of how he called it, that his time here was very educational for him. That interacting with all these different individuals really helped him gain a very informative perspective on how things work in this world, and also just makes him kind of reflect on just different dimensions of society. I just found it really interesting how he describes these observations. So for example, he speaks about how he was lodging, he was staying in a lodging with prostitutes that had a lot of prostitutes. And every single day he would see all these different men going in and to basically, taking the services from these prostitutes. And he describes how, what I found it very interesting, he just kind of describes how he would actually interact with the men that were taking the prostitute services, and how basically he kind of described the psychological pressure that these men were being put on by their wives, and just kind of like really providing some insight on some reasonings as to why some of these supposedly accomplished white men were pushing themselves to go and buy prostitutes. And he has a really good job kind of just giving these different observations of these different interactions that he's had with all these different types of individuals. And he also starts to speak about in this chapter about his observations of, and he spoke about this in other chapters as well, but essentially the observations that he had with how a white woman's attraction towards, as he put, the Negro, the Black man. And he kind of describes how these white women had this craving for the Negro, but they never were actively looking for having a serious relationship with them, because he said that the white women, and they understood that there's an unwritten rule, so to speak, that a black man can only go so high in society, they're never going to be able to truly take care of you. And despite the fact that there are so many white women that he's seen, including Sophia, his own lover at the time, that were craving these black men, it was never out of a feeling, it was never out of like affection or love or wanting to make a committed relationship, but more of a desire or a very powerful lust for, as he called, like the taboo love of having a black man. And he kind of describes this again in other chapters. And he even speaks about how Sophia, the woman that he was seeing, got married recently. And yet that didn't really change anything for their dynamic, because it was understanding that they could never have a serious relationship. It was just more of like a fling, so to speak. And that there were so many other white women who would marry white men for that financial security, but still and go have their fun with the Negro, as he puts it. And it just kind of really helps describe for us the environment and the atmosphere of racial tensions at that time, because it's not that no biracial relationships were happening. Biracial relationships were indeed there, but it was more of they were seen as not really serious. It was more of like just a fling and attraction to what's considered taboo. But inshallah to continue, I also just kind of want to highlight a couple more points that inshallah we can go ahead and open the floor for discussion. And I kind of want to highlight first and foremost Malcolm's entrance into drug-related crime. So eventually he ends up losing his position at Small's bar due to him kind of inadvertently tipping a undercover cop about prostitution, and this kind of caused a lot of issues where he was forced to basically leave the bar. And so he was talking with his friend Sammy about what he can do to make money. And so with Sammy's guidance, he decided to get into, as was put at the time, peddling reefers or selling marijuana, basically. And this was an experience that he felt was very liberating. He made quite a lot of money. He was pretty successful at selling drugs at this time for a good while. He felt like that he was finally free. And he kind of described how at this time he felt like he finally was able to be on the level of those same hustlers that he admired, that sense of freedom, that sense of not having to abide by a system which he saw as corrupt and unfair. So it really was kind of a liberating experience for him. But of course, he definitely had quite a few challenges. He kind of talks about some of the different types of challenges that he went through during this time, such as a lot of undercover cops were on to him, and how we had to utilize all these different types of strategies in order to cover his tracks and keep the authorities off of him. And this caused him in certain cases to become very financially struggling for a good while. But eventually he kind of shifted his strategy to where instead of just selling marijuana in Harlem, he would actually utilize the railroads and kind of sell marijuana to these different musicians in different areas and regions in order for him to start making more of a profit. But the last part I really want to talk about is Malcolm's plan and strategy to get out of the draft. As we know, World War II was going on at this time, and the draft came about where Malcolm and every other male of age was being called to serve their country or fight for their country. And this particular situation here is really kind of, again, gives us an example of just how intelligent Malcolm was, and just really how creative he was. Because once he got that draft letter, he already had this whole plan phased out. He took all the experience that he's accumulated through all these different types of interactions to basically make this strategy to where he comes off as just being too mental, basically, for too not really mentally competent in order to actually fight for the military. And he talks about how, and honestly, for those of you who haven't actually read the chapter, I do recommend you to read this chapter, because I thought his whole strategy at the end was just, it really was just kind of funny and really just creative. And how he would go outside and say that he was going to fight for the Japanese army, and he was just being really flamboyant and loud. And even during the time when he would go and for the inspection for the draft, how he was just making all these, outlandish things, but not in a way where it was obvious that he was putting on an act. He did it in a very convincing manner, just kind of highlighting for us how Malcolm was very, very astute when it came to human interactions, and when it came to basically putting on an act. He knew how to convince people. He knew how to trick people, and really he just knew how to basically put on an act in a way that would stump some of the most, intelligent people at that time. And it just was really, really interesting. And this act that he was able to put on ended up working, and he was able to avoid being drafted due to them basically think that he just was mentally unstable and just dangerous and not really fit for the job, which again kind of reminds us of how he was able to use his words in the last chapter to get out of a fight with that army guy that was really intoxicated and trying to get into a fight with him, and how he was able to, as Sister Rashida put it, use his words to cause the man to become completely naked. So again, in this situation, Malcolm used his words and his charisma and his ability just to put on an act to, trick the entire system into getting him out of the draft. So it was really just very interesting. And that's really where the chapter ends. So inshallah ta'ala, we can go ahead and stop very soon to open the floor for discussion, inshallah ta'ala. Those of you who are tuning in through our YouTube and Facebook live streams, it will be ending the program right here. Inshallah ta'ala, next week we'll be starting chapter 7. Inshallah, hope to see you all then. Jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah ta'ala.